Dcm.Works. That still only counts as one. Okay, guys, I'm going to keep this brief because it's really hot in Brisbane at the moment. We just got back from Melbourne. This episode was recorded in Melbourne with Gabe from Sans Pants, and you'll sort of learn who he is as we go through. But the big takeaway from this one is to make sure you go check out his stuff. It's awesome, and we love it. And I wanted to just say beforehand, we took the minimal equipment we could with us, so there's no pop filters or anything. I've done my best to scrub the audio. It took me a few hours, but hopefully it's not too bad. And yeah, enjoy.
This is Christopher Walken, here to warn you that this contains some explicitly foul language. And if you don't like that, then I'll put my foot in your throat.
The soundtrack's amazing.
Yeah.
The visuals are very, well done. And, the gameplay is super fun. And, because those three things are there, it's exceptionally good.
I could do it in a heartbeat and make millions, but it would feel like just gouging my soul out.
Yeah. Jurassic Park's a little more like DDR.
If Shrek is a fairy tale creature, can he actually own land and want to kick them off? Where did that come from? You have to make a lot of shit up to make good art.
Yeah.
That's just the truth, buddy. Hey guys, this is the Dcm.Works interview series. My name is David DCM, creative director, lead writer of Dcm.Works, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. As always, we ask our guest our opening question. So guest, who are you?
Who am I? My name is Gabriel Bergmoser. I'm a Melbourne-based writer, author, playwright, prospective screenwriter, and I regularly appear on Sans Pants Radio Movie Maintenance,
Excellent.
where we fix bad movies.
Correct. So I wanted to touch on, you mentioned in there the Sans Pants stuff, so I want to talk about that really quickly before we get into everything else. So your role on that show was sort of, you tend to pitch various scripts that you've written about, prospective films you'd like to see made, or you deconstruct other films. So what kind of, in that experience, what's your favorite part of that show?
Oh, man. Well, yeah, because Movie Maintenance sort of started out because I was involved in Sans Pants Radio way back at the start. We're talking 2011 when they first started recording. Mm-hmm. And on the show that would eventually become Plumbing the Death Star, which is probably their most well-known show, which was at the time called An Hour of Your Life You Never Get Back. Which was we just talked randomly about film. And then I kind of fell out of the picture for a while, and Zamet asked me back for Movie Maintenance, which they wanted to launch. And the idea was, the first 7 episodes, we would fix the Star Wars prequels. So we'd had a different guest every episode, and basically we would get to come in and pitch our ideal version of a Star Wars prequel. And after that, I sort of fell into it more consistently. And so the fun of Movie Maintenance is that basically it started out where we choose a bad movie. And so, for example, starting with Star Wars, and we would pitch a better version of it. Yeah. So it would be, you can make huge sweeping changes, rewrite the whole script or whatever the hell you want, or you can just make slight tweaks to make it better.
Just a little adjustments.
Yeah. And it ended up being really, really fun. So it was things like I've always kind of had ideas in my head about Dexter, which was a show I really loved, but eventually went up the shitter.
Went off the rails a bit.
Oh god, yeah. And I always had this idea that the 5th season of Dexter could have been so good with relatively minor tweaks to what they were doing and the formula they had. And so that was kind of one of the early ones I did, and it sort of went from there. And then at first it was just a broadly speaking, this is kind of what I would have done in Dexter season 5, and then it sort of evolved into, before, instead of, coming in and just sort of pitching a version, I'd go away and I'd kind of write, these dot points, I guess, almost treatments of these films.
The story beats.
Yeah, so they'd be, rewrites or sequels. So we did there was a Jaws sequel, there was a Hannibal Book 5. It stopped being movies after a while. It brought it
just
out.
sort of, TV shows and...
Yeah, it's really, really fun because it's sort of I guess the best way to describe it is it's like fan fiction without the stigma of being fan fiction, because you're not actually sitting down and writing a full script or writing a full story and everything. It's just spend a couple of hours, you take a story that you really love or an entry in a franchise you really love but could be better, and you get to sort of rework it, I guess, in your own style.
You can play in that
fashion.
space,
and it's really, really fun. It's because you're not writing anything that's you're gonna necessarily make or produce or anything like that. But in terms of just getting to, I guess, play in the playground of franchises and worlds that you really enjoy, the Star Wars ones are particularly really, really fun.
They're quite riveting because you can tell that all of you really
we all really love
it,
Star Wars, which is, obviously that's how the podcast started. So
yeah, exactly.
So it's really cool because it's you get to go away and it's Zamet gets to do his ideal Boba Fett film. I did my ideal ObiWan film, and it's cool because you get to take your favorite characters and be what story would I want to tell with them? it's like one of the most enjoyable things. Like I really love doing it.
I wanted to touch on you mentioned there your Obi-Wan anthology story that you pitched. In that particular one, it's sort of this Wild West. It really reminds me of like a Fistful of Dollars kind of style. Like it's very gritty. What was sort of your inspiration for coming into that one? Because it's quite, it's not everyone's first reaching point for if they wanted to do an anthology film.
Yeah.
So where did that sort of come from for you?
For me, like personally, okay, this can sound really weird, but like I've got a really weird relationship with the Star Wars prequels. In that, I mean, episode 1 is appalling, we know that. And look, I love the originals and stuff, but I think it was Zamet said on one of the episodes of Movie Maintenance that the perfect age to watch and enjoy the Star Wars prequels is 12. Because you're old enough to kind of grasp the weird shit political stuff, but young enough to still be entertained by crazy CGI and backflipping lightsaber fights and all of that. And I particularly remember watching episode 2 when I would have been 11 or 12 when it came out. And I remember like my friends at school and we were just like obsessively in love with it. And it was only kind of later that you realize I mean, at the time it was obvious that the love story was kind of trite and that Anakin was a bit shit and all this stuff. But like episode 2 and 3 in particular are two films I have like a real nostalgic
because at the time, like you're in it. You know? Yeah.
And I know now they're not. Like, they don't compare the originals. We know that everything bad that you can say about the Star Wars prequels has been said. But what I find interesting now is that we're so far disconnected from the crushing disappointment of those films that I feel like we're at a point where we can start to reevaluate what they did well. And one of the things I think was particularly excellent was the characterization of Obi-Wan. And I read this great review that talked about how the Ewan McGregor version of Obi-Wan is essentially, in one way or another, he's basically the Han Solo of the prequel trilogy. Not because he's Han Solo, but because he's the funniest character. He's got the best lines. He's kind of a badass. He's a bit of a lone wolf. And not that he is Han Solo, but that he sort of actually fulfills that role in a really interesting way.
He lets us hang our lampshade and go, here's a guy who knows how ridiculous this all is.
And I don't know, Obi-Wan, I don't know if this was just Ewan McGregor's performance, but I love the fact that he was this character who, even though he was this straight-laced, serene Jedi master, particularly in episode 2, there is a bit of an edge to him.
Yeah.
Like, he walks into that bar in Coruscant and he's just like, I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to go up. And he's a bit of a badass. He's a bit of a rogue. He's got that Qui-Gon Jinn roguish element to him. So, like, I don't know. I thought Obi-Wan was always a really, really good character. And I think that, like, Ewan McGregor wasn't totally served by that film. So I guess my take going into that was that I thought it'd be really, really cool to, I guess, pitch this hypothetical film where you could give Ewan McGregor the chance to really be Obi-Wan. It's like, well, what do? You do Tatooine. Well, what can you do with Tatooine? You make it a fucking Western. Absolutely. And then you sort of think, well, so what's the conflict? What's the interesting thing? It's like, fucking bring Darth Maul back. He's canonically alive because of Clone Wars.
Yeah, that's right.
Like,
he's around.
That would be fun. I would love to watch that. And instead of, it's not a big sort of epic sweeping Jedi saga. It's a very personal, focused Western. And if the anthology films know what's good for them, that's what they'll be doing. They'll be doing smaller, edgier, darker, more interesting Star Wars stories that don't necessarily have to be these big, sweeping space operas.
Because that's why we've got the main series. You know,
absolutely.
Give us some smaller sections. Give us that gritty one-on-one. The rivalries, there's some interesting stories that some people have pitched where it's sort of, what about these characters who are left on these planets? What happens to them after, 5 years of nothing happening? Where do they end up? Who's trying to survive where? What are these characters doing?
So much. And it's, like, I don't know, it's, like, Clone Wars, I think, really started to do that in interesting ways that Star Wars Rebels haven't done so much as a show. Like, because Clone Wars has these interesting little episodes that play with what are the implications of living in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
And they play with it in really interesting ways that don't necessarily have to be about the Jedi. Some of the best episodes focus on the clones.
No, absolutely. With Rex and his sort of sense of identity.
Oh, it's amazing. The one episode that really, really sold me on Clone Wars was that one where Rex gets wounded and he stays at a farm, and it turns out the farmer at this farm is a deserting clone trooper.
Oh, yeah, that's
And you have Rex being like, you're a deserter, I need to sell you out. Yeah. And the deserter's like, well, no. He goes, nobody gave me any choice. I was a slave. I escaped. I decided to have my own identity because who has the right to tell you what to do with your life? I want to do what I want with my life. And he's like to Rex, you have that same choice. And it's great because you see Rex being like so conflicted by it. And it's a great conflict with like great fucking implications for that universe. I don't know. I think the anthology films would be really well served by doing similar interesting things.
Yeah, and it's about those character pieces, really.
Absolutely.
Because it's when you have the setting, which is what the main films establish, you get to grab these pieces of the world and go, what are the implications of this thing that we
Yeah,
built? And I think that's
definitely.
super fascinating to sort of take forward, and hopefully,
I really, yeah.
Star Wars
it's-
moving forward will realize that and kind of.
Well, I gotta say, like, on the note of Star Wars, there's part of me that's a bit worried that, like, Disney's, just based on The Force Awakens, just based on Rebels, and look, I mean, I haven't seen Rogue One, but, like, what I'm seeing of Rogue One beginning to sneak out, it just seems really, really geared towards nostalgia. Like, Rogue One's
they're
like,
bringing all
we're
these old
bringing in
characters
Vader,
back.
we're bringing in Grand Moff Tarkin, we're bringing in Boba Fett, we're setting up young Han Solo, because apparently Star Wars is Marvel now.
We don't
it's
need
just-
that.
Like, we don't need that shit, man.
Yeah.
Just, like, tell us an interesting high story set in the Star Wars universe. We don't need Darth Vader. We don't need Boba Fett. Just, like, give us new characters.
Just be like, hey, here's a street kid from fucking Coruscant. Let's see what
Fuck
his life
yeah.
is. Give
Tell
us
us
some.
his story,
give us
man.
some. Oh, it's just there's so much to bite into.
Yeah,
They, I mean, they will eventually, and some of the novelizations do a good job of kind of
absolutely,
taking a bigger
absolutely.
chunk. I mean, one of the best examples is in the novelization of The Force Awakens. You get that moment where you realize that those ashes that Kylo was dunking his helmet into, that's some ashes from Vader.
Vader, yeah,
And that's
yeah.
a really small thing that they don't actually touch on in the film. But small stuff like that, if they go, okay, well, how did this object come to be in the Death Star? Maybe just look at like some small story.
stuff-
Or
I mean, that's interesting. And like the Force Awakens novelization was one of the most terribly written books I've read in my life.
Look, it's
But-
not great.
Oh, it's not great. But like that said, it had some really, really interesting stuff. Like there were certain things that it really fleshed out the film should have. Like the idea that, and one thing I think is so crucial that I can't believe the film got rid of it, was the idea that Kylo Ren knew that, because we were like, did Kylo Ren know that Vader like betrayed the Emperor at the last minute?
Yeah.
And the novelization makes it clear that yes, he did, which totally explains his motivation for killing Han.
Yes.
Because he's like, okay, Vader failed because he couldn't kill a family member. I'm going to
have
succeed.
I got to
But
do what he couldn't.
It doesn't make him stronger. It makes him weaker.
Yes, which
And
is
how
quite
good-
fascinating.
That's so rich. That's like some fucking major Shakespearean conflict
and
going
it's
on
such
there.
a good turn.
Oh,
Like,
it's
just
awesome.
Brilliant.
It's brilliant stuff like that somehow the film, like, how do you fuck that up? How do you take
It's-
something so good and not do it properly?
It's I mean, I'm sure we'll see in the DVD extras when they
Yeah,
come out that
definitely,
it'll be like, oh, well,
definitely.
we put that in there and then we ran out of time, or it was, it'll be something
They
small
could have
like
just
that.
cut the Raftars and they would have had so much
Get
time
rid of that
for
Star
good
Trek
stuff.
scene? Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? It's fucking stupid.
So that being said, I wanted to kind of sort of touch on how you started into writing. So you mentioned before off microphone that that you sort of started when you were about 13. So what was that process like for you when you began?
Well, okay, I think the way I probably best describe it is that, like, when I was a kid, I was always really, really obsessed with stories. And, like, I loved books, I loved movies, I got right into that shit. And the one thing that, like, always upset me, because I was obsessively into a lot of different books and movies. And, like, and I mean obsessively, like, it was all I thought about, all I kind of read, all I consumed, all of that. And it always felt wrong to me that I could love a story so much, but the characters didn't belong to me.
Yeah.
So it was like, I remember reading like the John Marsden Tomorrow When the War Began series, and that was just my favorite thing. Or, the Harry Potter books as well, or Lemony Snicket, and just being so in love with these series. And when I was 13, in a fucked up way, the Hannibal Lecter books too.
It has a place. It's
oh, look, that shaped me. Those books shaped me so much. Like, I remember like picking up Red Dragon when I was 13 and just plowing through Red Dragon, Science Slams, and Hannibal over a week and being like, holy fuck, and secretly watching the movies in the mornings while my parents were out at work, and like, it's like watching the door for them to come home because they wouldn't. Anyway, it was
They clearly wouldn't approve because you were far too young.
Would not have approved. But yeah, so basically, I think I always sort of like wrote bits and pieces when I was a kid, like silly little stories and stuff. But I remember like when I was 13, I sort of hit this point where I was like, okay, if I'm gonna love stories this much, I have to tell my own.
Yeah.
Because then the characters can be mine. Then I can do what I want with them. Then I can own them completely.
Absolutely.
And so the very first novel I wrote, it was the worst thing ever. I've still got it. It was a Hannibal Lecter / Saw ripoff
Oh, nice.
called Slasher.
Ooh,
So,
nice.
great name,
Original
Slasher.
name.
Yeah, really
Liam
original
just
name,
gave,
really.
Our
And
producer
it-
just gave you the okay for that one.
Oh,
Brilliant.
awesome. No, it was not derivative in the slightest. It was, and I'm not even going to go into it, but it was fucking awful. But I don't know, Slasher was, the one thing I do appreciate is that, like, I wrote Slasher when I was 13, like, in my parents' office, just, like, smashing it out, and I finished it. And I just remember, like, when I finished it, because I'd always had all these ideas growing up that I never seemed to be able to write. And then when I finished writing Slasher, it was something like I could just write anything.
Yeah.
Like any of those other ideas
it's
I
quite
had,
weird, isn't it?
once that was out of the way, once I'd like cleared out that piece of shit, and I'm not saying that anything I wrote after that was good, because it wasn't.
No.
But then I just like I had all these other ideas, and so I wrote like all these like different fantasy horror short stories and novellas and stuff. And then I think it was when I was about 15. I wrote this fucking awful teen angst like novel. It was basically Fight Club about teenagers.
Oh, nice.
It's about this like kid who like grows up in a small country town like me, and you know hates everyone in the town and hates all the conformity and hates all the bogans and everything. And then he goes away on holiday, and he is like, oh, I can reshape my identity while I'm away, and that reshaped identity formulates as a split personality that is like this anarchist. It was really shit.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that I was ripping off Fight Club until later, and I had seen Fight Club, so it was definitely in my head. And I was like, I wonder where I got this amazing idea from. Oh yeah, Fight Club.
Actually, that does happen to even the best of writers. You get into the start of a project and you'll go, I've started rewriting blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly.
Shit.
And you start to, and I've even had that recently. I was working on a novel the other day, and I was like, fuck, this is really good. Then I was like, this is just the plot of His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. I was like, this is just the exact same plot. And I was like, fuck, okay, I have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, even then, like I wrote this, and that was the first thing of mine that like I actually started showing to people and like actually getting some attention for. Like,
so who was when you had that finished, who was what was your go-to for showing? Who were you showing?
First it was friends.
Yeah.
And that was the first time when, before that, you know, you always had the friends who like read things out of obligation.
Yeah,
friends who were like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess I'll read it and stuff like that. And also I used to post a lot of stories on a website that I don't know if it still exists called fictioncentral.com.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it was a sub website of one of those fanfiction.com websites.
Yeah.
And basically, but it was for totally original fiction. And so I used to post all my stories on that, and you'd like get a few comments in that. And yeah, this story about this angsty teenager, I gave to some friends, and that was the first time when people were like, where's the fucking next chapter? Where's the fucking next chapter?
Yeah.
And it was the first time that like I put it on this website, and it actually got a following. Like there were people who would come back for each new chapter, read every new chapter, and it started to pick up. And it was the first time I was like, I might actually not be bad at this.
That's the first taste you had of that hunger.
Yeah, and then, you know, then it was like, I think it was a high school girlfriend's mum read them, and then she passed it on to a friend of hers who was a published author, who then called me, and like we spoke on the phone for like 3 hours, where he just like gave me some advice, talked me through it, was like, look, you know, I think you've got a lot of talent, I think you're really good at this, I don't think this is there yet, but send me anything you've got as it goes on.
Yeah.
And so basically that just led to, I just kept writing through into adulthood, and just, kept going from there, and pretty much after that there was sort of no looking back.
It's a slippery slope, isn't
exactly. Oh, and it becomes an addiction. And then honestly, at a certain point, you know, my parents were like, oh, so what are you going to do if the writing thing doesn't work out? And I was like, well, the fact is I'm not good at anything else, so
actually, it's quite
the
funny,
reality
isn't
is
it?
I don't have a choice.
It's quite funny, you know. One of the biggest questions that a lot of authors I tend to talk to have, you know, I'll say, oh, well, what was the turning point? When did you know it worked? And for most people, it's when they're like 13 or 15, and it's the first time that someone reads something, and there's something really, there's a word for it that I can't think of, but it's this sense of intoxicating gratification where someone goes, I like what you've done, and you go, well, that's this thing that I've written as a part of the identity I have at this time. So
exactly.
when you write, and
it's a validation. It's a sense of validation,
and it's this thing that people who aren't creatively minded or don't produce stuff, they can't really grasp what that's like.
I completely agree, and that's why I've said to people before, the thing about writing is that it is better than being drunk, it's better than being high, it's better than sex, it's better than drugs, it's better than everything. Like, it is just the best feeling in the world is of having had like a hard day of writing, having done like 5,000 words, knocked out 5,000 words in a couple of hours, and just been like, holy fuck, I am kicking ass. And I would remember like coming to work even.
You're
and,
like, I'm the king of everything.
Buzzing, and like with this like, you know, just like this ecstatic energy that would like see me through the whole night. And just wanting to tell everyone about this thing I'd written that nobody knew what the fuck I was talking about.
And it's
my
probably
friends were like, oh, so I had this scene where the character did this, and they're like, what do you want about that?
And you're like, look, and you know, it's probably garbage because it's the first draft.
Of course, but it doesn't matter.
It's that addiction at the time. You don't, like any addiction, it's exciting for those who are in it. But everyone else, it's really boring.
Oh, of course, exactly. But, you know, if you end up eventually with something that is readable and something that people like,
it's even.
Then it's.
Oh, look, it's a gateway drug. It's just, you're basically told that the thing that you've spent these hours wasting away is actually worthwhile.
And it's funny you bring up the thing about validation and everything, because it's weird because, you know, everyone says, oh, you know, you don't need other people's validation and everything, but to be a writer, you kind of do. And I only say that because, look, the fact is I would write whether people liked what I did or not. I would keep writing until I got to a point where people liked what I did. But the thing about it is, I've always felt choosing writing as a career is inherently arrogant, because basically what you're assuming is that people should pay money for things I have come up with in my head, and I believe that these ideas are good enough to warrant people handing over cash to consume them.
Correct.
And you have to have that belief. And so that's why, like, I mean, I never understand those writers who I say, like, I know other writers, you know, younger writers and stuff, and I've said to them, hey, like, do you want to send me some of your stuff? And they say, oh, no, it's not good. It's not good. And I was like, so why are you writing if you don't think what you're writing is good?
Yeah.
Like, you have to like even if you think it can be better, why are you writing if you don't like what you're writing? Like, look, I've written stories that I thought were good at the time, and I finished them, and I was like, that did not work out how I thought it was.
Yep.
But I still like the story at the time, otherwise I wouldn't have written it. Like, why do you, like, which to me says either you've got unbelievable self-control to keep writing even though you believe what you're doing is shit, because I wouldn't keep writing if I thought what I was writing was shit, even if it is shit and I just don't know it. Or alternatively, you're just like spewing out false modesty, in which case if you can't show your writing to people, how are you ever going to get feedback? How are you ever going to get criticism, which is so important? And how's the right person ever going to see your work?
No, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, like, to be a good writer, you have to hold two beliefs in your mind at the same time that are contradictory. You have to know that what you're writing is complete garbage, and also know that what you're writing is the best thing you could possibly
Are you a
produce.
Bruce Springsteen fan by any chance?
You're wearing a Bruce Springsteen
I am wearing
shirt.
a Bruce Springsteen t-shirt, but he said that.
Did he?
He said at a concert recently, and it really struck a chord with me, because he said, like, his exact words were, to become great, and obviously he's talking about music, but I think it can be applied to any art. He said, to become great, you know, it's the key is to hold two completely contradictory ideas in your head at all times. You have to think that you can always be better and think you're the best.
Yes.
You have to take yourself as seriously as life itself and be able to laugh at yourself and take the piss out of yourself at every chance. He went through all these different things, and I think he's right. Like,
No, absolutely. And
yeah, like, it's just...
if for anyone looking for something, sort of the people at home, if you want to research this a bit more, there's a thing called ALAR, which is ALAR, and it's sort of this belief. It's kind of that belief where you're able to hold two conflicting things at once, and in doing so, it makes both more effective.
Yeah,
I think it's really important as an author.
Well, it also keeps you grounded and it keeps you balanced, because, like, too much ego can send you. And, like, look, ego's a really, really easy trap to fall into. The moment a few people tell you you're good at something. Like, you know, it's that thing of so many people tell you you're good at something, the worst thing that could happen is that you start to believe it.
Yes.
And even though you do believe it, on one note, I think that whole stay hungry thing is really important.
Yeah.
That whole sense of always striving to be better, always striving to improve. Even if, and I think it is so important that you like what you do, I think it is key to always think, I can be better, I can get here, I can get higher,
Absolutely.
I can improve.
Yeah.
I think it's so essential. Like, I think the moment you start being satisfied and start thinking, I'm the best, like...
That's the minute you lose your drive, really.
Exactly, and then you'll come out with something totally shit. Like, and I know, because I made that mistake. Play of mine that I put on a couple of years ago. So my first play that because I started, well, the bulk of my writing output is in independent theatre. And my first few plays were done by youth theatre companies out in the Yarra Valley, and my first independently produced play, Reunion, which is about 4 high school friends who get together 5 years after school finishes, and everything goes wrong. And the drunker they get, all their problems, all their issues, all their dramas start to come out. And, like, I put that on in 2013 with, like, a group of friends from work, and somehow, like, and that was another sort of turning point moment where I put this play on, not thinking it would be any good, not thinking anyone would come to see it, just being like, fuck it, I want to put on a play. I wrote it, and then, like, you're getting good reviews from total strangers, and, like, people are coming to see it.
People
and
that aren't
get,
your
like,
friends.
decent shows, and you're like, wait, hang on, what? Like, people are actually laughing at this. People are enjoying this. And so that was kind of the first time I was like, oh, maybe I'm actually pretty good at the theatre thing. And then I wrote a play called Below Babylon, which was a sort of dystopian sci-fi drama. And I wrote that. So I've got a little production company, Bitten by Productions. And the group of us, myself, my friend Justin, Ash, and Finn, the 4 of us sort of, like, co-produce all these plays together. And Below Babylon was this play that it was like a dystopian sci-fi drama about, basically, it's a Western set in a dystopian future Australia about a former enforcer for a, like, dangerous conglomerate drug cartel who has betrayed this cartel and is waiting in a bar for them to come and kill him. And it's all like the pressure cooker of he's in the bar, and at some point his old best friend turned bitter enemy will find him, but it's all kind of him, like, getting caught up in the lives of the people in the bar and all this shit. And anyway, it was the kind of play that, like, a lot of people got really into. We got a lot of money together. We did it as, like, a fairly big budget production. It did really well. And coming out of Below Babylon, it was one of those things where I was like, fuck, I can do anything. I can fucking do anything. And I'd had this idea about this play, that's play called, I think it was called A Good German, and it was basically, I know it wasn't originally called A Good German. It did end up being called A Good German. It was originally about a Nazi in a concentration camp who falls in love with a Jewish girl. And I had this idea for a while. I thought, yeah, that's a good story. That'll be fun. And I wrote it. And the thing is, by this point, I believed I was good enough for that first draft to be fine.
Oh, okay.
I believe, like, I was like, nah, fuck it. It'll be fine. Ooh. It'll work. It'll be good.
Ooh.
And it got put on. And I wish to God it had failed financially. Mm-hmm. I wish to God people hadn't come and seen it.
Yep.
But critically, holy fuck, the most vitriolic review in history was written about that play. You type into Google my name followed by A Good German, the Stage Whispers review. It literally opens with the line, A Good German, the bad play. And you read it, and it is savage. It is like, think of the most vitriolic, angry review you've ever heard in your life.
Yep.
This was worse because me thinking my script was good enough while writing about the Holocaust seemed like the most arrogant thing in the world.
Yeah.
When it wasn't there. And it seemed like I know I'd done my research. I know I'd worked on it, but like it didn't come across in the execution. And I probably hadn't made things clear enough. And the fact of the matter is, the worst reviews, the ones that hurt the most, are the ones that you know are right.
Of
and
course,
reading this review, it was like, it stung. I've had people say horrible things about my writing where it's like, yeah, but I also don't think you're right, so it doesn't really hurt. But in this case, yeah, it was like a knife to the heart because the guy was right. He'd said the right thing. He completely skewered everything that was wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, the review, I'm looking at it now, and it is just brutal. You know, the opening line is A Good German, the bad play.
If you want to pass that to me, I can find the highlights.
Yeah.
Because, I want to keep this, it's... Oh, man, because the parts where he talks about me.
I think, you know, because the thing is, like, the minute it becomes a personal attack, even though a lot of your writing there's a distance, I think particularly a first draft, it becomes about you because there's no distance between you and the work. Whereas like if someone wrote a bad review about your book, you're like, oh, well, we've been working on it for like 3.5 years, editing and stuff. It's me and my editor and the other people involved, and like it's a blow to all of us. But if it's something that raw, it's just coming for you, and it's the jugular, you know. But
see, that's it. Like, okay, so yeah, I mean, looking at now, so the choice parts, apart from all the parts that tear the play itself to shreds, the part where it talks about me, there's 2 paragraphs.
Oh yeah, okay.
Perhaps Gabriel Bergmoser figured he already knew all he needed to know about Nazi concentration camps or death camps, or that his bogus grey areas of morality, I'm quoting the program here, were so powerful and elemental that context and setting didn't matter. Given the subject matter, either decision displays irresponsibility.
Yeah.
And then there's a part at the end where he says, what is really surprising is that A Good German is Mr. Bergmoser's 6th play since 2010. And again, according to the program, his work has been met with praise and success.
Yeah.
Is what is going on here then a mysterious anomaly, or simply amateurism run rampant?
Now,
what annoyed me about that was the fact that I talk about praise and success, and I talk about good reviews that I've had, because that's in the program. It says, oh, you know, this play was met with good reviews. The magazine that wrote this review has given me some of my best reviews ever.
This
guy
worse.
did not do his fucking research before he said that.
Worse.
But yeah, if I ever write an autobiography, I'm going to call it Amateurism Run Rampant.
Nice.
Because that can sum up my entire career thus far and going forward.
So you hit this point where you get this bad review. What's the transitionary period like from that to where you write a script good enough to get this award and fly over to America?
You stop listening to people who tell you you're amazing. You stop listening.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, the guys in my production company, and like, fucking bless them, they work their asses off. They bring so much to the table. They've helped workshop scripts to the point of being some of the best stuff I've done.
Yeah.
But the fact is, I think when I showed that script to these guys, to my friends at the production company, there was a lot of support for it.
Yeah.
And I feel like we'd gotten to a point where they sort of trusted me enough to be like, no, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, they were too close to it.
That's it. And the thing was, it's so easy to give work to people who you know are going to tell you it's good.
Yeah.
Because these are some of my best friends. And it's so easy to give this work to them and be like, they're going to tell me it's amazing no matter what. Instead of giving it to the people who will be harsh and will be tough.
You know, you want to give it to someone who's going to say, hey, you know what? There are good bits, but here is what you did terribly.
Here's what you did terribly.
Because that's what you need.
Exactly. And so, I don't know. I think I think my outlook just changed. I never again put on a play that I considered a first draft. I sent plays, when I would write stuff, I would send it to a lot of people who I knew were harsh. Particularly at that point, I was in film school and I was surrounded by a lot of other writers who had a really discerning eye.
Okay,
and,
so you've got that option.
We're all very honest with each other. Like the group I got from film school, we're like, it's a great group because everybody's supportive, but everybody's also really straight with each other about problems.
Yeah.
So, and we're all also at a point where I don't think anybody feels like it's a personal attack when someone says, look, this is shit. This is shit. And so I think we all can take that because...
You can separate works and
Yeah,
person.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I've just been a lot more discerning about who I send scripts to. I've been a lot more... I also know that, like, one thing, and this isn't me, this is going to sound like an excuse for good German. It's not.
Yeah.
But one thing is that I knew that the script wasn't ready.
Yep.
But I listened to people who told me it was. And that's my fault more than anything else, because that speaks to my own arrogance, that I was like, even though my gut feeling is this is not ready, in my head I was like, nah, it'll be fine.
Like, everyone has said it'll be fine.
Everyone said it'll be good.
Yeah.
I'm right. Like...
And that's a weird headspace to be in as well, because that means that whatever you're producing creatively, you've let the praise and people saying that it's good, you've let that override your natural instinct as a writer to be like, well, it might be good, but it's not the best it could be.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I've definitely changed. I've definitely, like, in terms of how I approach writing, I do a lot of redrafting, a lot of rewriting before things go on. Windmill's a script that won the Sir Peter Ustinov Award. That was rewritten so many times. Like, because that was my final project for film school.
Yeah.
And so, at VCA, Victorian College of the Arts, every week we had meetings with a tutor who would, like, read the script every week. And every week we were expected to hand in another draft.
Oh, okay.
So it was... huge rewrite after huge rewrite after huge rewrite, to the point where what I handed in could not have been any better.
Yes.
Like, it was so... Like, and I know because I look at it and it's like, fuck, it is so tight. Because, like, those tutors, again, like, they're very honest.
Yeah, their job is to just
tell
drill
you this doesn't work.
Correct, yeah.
And you have to be able to hear that. It's so crucial that you're able to hear that.
And that's why you pay editors, is because they have distance from it. Yeah, so the award that you won, can you talk us through sort of what the award is for and how you came into that? Did you submit it yourself? What was the process for that?
It's called the Sir Peter Ustinov Television Scriptwriting Award, and basically it's an award that is run by the Academy in America, as in Oscars, Emmys, those guys.
Yes, the guys in the big chairs.
Yeah, those guys. It's it still feels weird coming out of my mouth, but basically what it is, it's an award that's been run since the 96 maybe, I think or 98 was the first one. But basically they the thinking behind the award is that it is to encourage upcoming writers in television. And basically the only criteria is that you have to be under 30. Yep. And you have to be from outside America.
Oh, so wow, okay.
Anyone else around the world can enter this competition.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool.
So basically the winner gets $2,500 and gets flown to the international Emmys in America.
Yes.
And, you're there for the festival,
spectacular.
You're there for all of that. It's huge.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So, basically the award closed the day before my final was due for VCA, which was, the final Windmill script. And, when you're a writer, you enter a lot of those competitions as they come up and you see them. So I entered it myself. I put it in because I was like, yeah, fuck it. Why not? What have I got to lose?
Yeah.
And I remember... It's really funny because the day before, there was one night I was out for drinks with these guys from uni, and I was on the train home with one of my friends, and we were talking about how the fact that, like, we'd finished film school and now we just kind of felt like we just didn't know what the next step was. Like, we didn't know how to move forward. We didn't know how to advance or how to get where we wanted to go. Yeah. And then we were just I got home and I was kind of feeling really dejected, and I woke up the next morning with this email saying I'd been shortlisted for this award. Yeah. And I was like, fuck, like, I mean, and I was happy with that. I was like, man, that's validation enough. Like, the fact that you get shortlisted for this international, like,
that's
prestigious
crazy,
fucking award, like, shortlisted is fine. And then for the next few weeks, I was like, so I didn't expect to win, but I sort of, like, looked up the past winners and when they'd been announced. And so I knew it was going to be on the 18th of September or around then. I would find out. And I kind of got closer and closer, and everyone's saying, don't get your hopes up. And I was saying, no, I haven't got my hopes up. I'm not going to win.
You got to play it down in your head, yeah.
Then I kind of had this weird moment, and I was like, hang on. If I get my hopes up, and I really am like, fuck, I hope I win, and then I don't win, I'll be disappointed for an hour, and then I'll move on to the next thing. Whereas if I don't get my hopes up, the excitement and anticipation and hope I feel now, I only get to feel once. I only get to feel this now in the build up to it. Yep. So fuck it, I'm getting my hopes up.
You go on tilt.
Right I really, really hope I'm going to win.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I just remember this, like, one morning I was going to get up for work, and I picked up my phone and I checked my phone to see if I'd had that email, expecting that, thanks but no thanks. You get very used to these rejection
as a writer,
emails.
you get used to it.
Yeah, it's always the same template. It's always like, thank you for your submission. The quality across the board was very high, unfortunately, but that shit.
We all know that email.
Yeah, that old chestnut. I got one of those the other day, actually.
Oh, nice.
It's always good. Keeps you humble.
It's refreshing.
But, it's good. Shakes it up. But then, so I was ready for that, and I saw I hadn't got an email, and I put my phone down, and as I put my phone down, it started to ring. Oh. And I picked it up, and I saw the New York number.
Oh, boy.
And I just remember being like, fuck. And I answered the phone, and the poor woman on the phone, like, it's like I momentarily forgot to speak English.
Oh, yeah.
So she answered the phone. She's like, "Oh, hello, just letting you know this is such and such calling from New York. Just letting you know that you've won the Sir Peter Ustinov Award." And I was like, I couldn't speak. I mean, I'm punching the air like furious and being like, "Fuck yes!" And then like for the next month after that, I was waiting for the email saying they got it wrong. Like I was waiting.
The
for
other
that.
shoe to drop.
And it was like,
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
going to
right.
believe it until I'm on the plane. Then I was on the plane. I was like, I'm not going to believe it until I get there. And then it was like, then I was like holding the award, and I was like,
Oh, this happened.
yes, this is real. Like, here I am at this, like, and then, you know, Broadway actors perform your script in front of an audience.
What was it like that staged, for that staging of that?
There was a moment when, because it's the international Emmys, it's not the primetime Emmys.
Yeah.
So the international Emmys are for shows outside America.
Yes.
So there's a lot of non-English language speaking shows, a lot of that kind of stuff, and a lot of really interesting writers, directors from around the world, but it's not as big an event. It's still huge. Like, you know, it's the ballroom at the Hilton booked out, massive gala.
It's massive, yeah.
But yeah, so before that, there's a 4-day conference, and you know you're there, and there's a lot of sort of networking, a lot of people sort of doing panels, and one of the panels is the live script reading. So you go in there, and it's Broadway actors basically performing your script in front of an audience, and they you know it's a stage reading, so they get up and they sort of act it out and they move around and everything. And I'm watching it, and it was fucking mental. These are like professional paid actors doing it. And it kind of finishes, and then immediately after reading, there was a cocktail party hosted by HBO that I was going to, and I was like, but I was really broke. Like, I had no money. And I was like, and obviously I didn't have to pay any money there, but I was like, I need to eat something before I start drinking in front of important producers and people from HBO. So I was like, the only thing I can afford is Macca's.
Nice.
So like, I've just been to this script reading. I've just had this Q&A where like people are grilling me about the story. I spoiled the whole fucking TV show idea for them. I was like, this is going to happen in episode 4. This is going to happen in episode 5 and all of that. And then like, you know, that happened, and I was like, okay, fuck, the cocktail party's about to start. I need to get something to eat. So I run out of the hotel, having just seen my script read, having just had a Q&A in front of an audience, run down to Times Square, go into Macca's at Times Square, about to go to a cocktail party hosted by HBO. I'm standing in line at Macca's about to get my 6 nugget meal. And I turn around and I see a mirror, and there's me, like, in my swanky suit, about to get Macca's because it's all I can afford, before I go to a cocktail party by HBO, having just come from a script reading after being flown to America. And I just had the biggest grin on my face. I was like, holy fuck, this is the best day of my life. Yeah. Like, this is the best day of my life.
It's the moment.
This is it. Like, holy fuck, this is an actual thing that has happened.
Yeah.
And it's like, after, you know, and anybody who writes knows this, like, you do so much for so long, and just getting that little bit of and not even a little bit, but like getting that validation, like getting to hold that award and being like, holy fuck, somebody in this area has told me I'm good. And again, any opinion is just someone's opinion, but holy fuck, getting an opinion from something like that,
absolutely,
it was unbelievable. It was just the most amazing thing.
You know, a lot of writers that I tend to speak to, they'll say things like, oh, well, that moment, you know, you spend your whole life as a writer basically treading water, more or less. And that's the moment where someone just offers you a hand and you sit on a life raft for a few minutes. Yeah. And it's that relief of being like, oh my God.
It's like, it's all right. I'm actually doing the right thing.
And then after a while it wears off and you're back treading water, but you know that life raft is there potentially in the future.
And that's it. And like, particularly because things, I mean, I don't know. Like, and I remember shortly before I won the Ustinov, I was at a point where I was starting to think, okay, like, I'd got another few rejection letters for another couple of novels and plays and stuff that I put into various things. And it gets to a point where you kind of look at it and you start to think, okay, like, I know everyone's like, oh, you know, you're still young and you're getting better and it's all about getting better. But at a certain point, you've been writing since you're 13 and you've been trying to get novels and stuff published since you were 18. And you're sort of sitting there thinking, well, if it's not going to happen now, what more do I need to do? How much better do I need to be before something happens or before somebody gives you that hand and pulls you out of the water?
Absolutely.
But again, like I said before, it's such an arrogant thought because you're sitting there thinking, oh, I work so hard. But it's like, yeah, but it's not like you're working so hard at a job where you're doing something for someone. You're working so hard at a job where you're the only person who really believes that what you're doing is worthwhile.
It's
and
inherently very selfish.
Any obligation to think that. Like, nobody on the planet has, and I see, other, you know, independent theatre people on Facebook who put up all this shit being like, oh, you know, come and support us. You know, nobody's coming to see the play tonight. Come and support us. All of this. We can, and my favorite one is, we can only do what we do when you support us. And I was like, nobody's asking you to do what you do.
It's not a requirement.
If people aren't coming to see you, you're not going to be a great loss to the theater world by not doing what you do. And that's the honest to God truth. Like,
Absolutely.
You should be like thanking that if you're performing to 2 people one night, then fucking perform your best.
Absolutely.
Because those 2 people have paid money and come to see you, which is more than you can ever expect of anybody when you're in the arts. Fucking appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Like, I really, you know, so that's it. That's why I think it's so hard, because it's such a shit thing to whine and complain about, where it's like, oh, I'm not doing well at this field that I've chosen for myself. And like, you know, nobody made me do this. I chose to do this. And it's like, that doesn't undersell like how powerful that gratification is when it does come.
Absolutely.
Like, I can't, yeah.
Okay, so changing gears for a minute. You've got Boone Shepard coming up. You touched on that before.
Yeah.
And so you put out the prequel, which is Boone Shepard and the Californian Catastrophe.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a sort of 30-ish page prequel.
Yeah, yeah.
What was which came first? So you've written 5 of these novels, correct?
Yeah.
When did the prequel come about? What was the...
Well, I actually wrote the prequel in America.
Oh, okay,
so
when you were
it's
there.
quite recent, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, so yeah, Boone Shepard, there's 5 books, but as of yet, only 4 are sort of committed to be published.
Yeah.
Because the first book, The Broken Record, wasn't... I think it's good, but you'll see when they sort of come out, the other 4 books have a very clear arc over those 4 books and a very clear story with a beginning, middle, and an end. The Broken Record is like a standalone adventure.
Oh, okay.
And what the publisher sort of said was that in terms of a first book in a series, Broken Record isn't that strong. It's not a book that's going to make you be like, holy fuck, this is something I need to see the next installment of.
Yeah.
Or something I need to pick up and like churn through, you know?
Yeah, burn through to the next.
So basically Broken Record kind of got cut off. And so, you know, it was the second book, which at the time was called Darkening Ventures, which is now just called Boone Shepard as the first in the series, because luckily there was nothing in Broken Record that was essential. All the character development, all the backstory, all the stuff you need to know happens in the second book. So that's now the first book.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I wrote the 5 books a couple of years ago, just back to back, like a sort of 1.5 year long writing session.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's now that's kind of gone on to be published. And when I was in America, I just wasn't doing that much writing when I was over there, but I was in LA and I kind of had a night off because I had a lot of meetings and stuff in LA, and I sort of had a night off where I was like, fuck, I'm just going to sit in a bar, have a beer and do some writing.
Yep.
And I've been like, what the fuck am I going to write? And I was like, fuck, I just want to actually hang out with Boone Shepard again. Like, this character I just haven't seen for a year. I just want to write a story with him.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck, I'm going to write a prequel where he's in LA and he's on an adventure because I'm in LA and I'm kind of feeling it right now. And so I just wrote that in one night. I just sat down in a bar, had a few beers and just wrote that story from top to bottom. And it was just really, really fun to write. And I sent it to my publisher. I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And she was like, well, let's release it as a prequel.
Yeah.
And so it's like been released online and it's going to be like a little handout in bookstores.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a little bound handout in bookstores, probably like in the month before the novel comes out, which will be in April.
Pique some interest.
And it'll be like just a thing, like, so, you know, like kids can pick it up, have a flick through, read it, and at the back there'll be a sort of publication date and everything for
all the good stuff.
For the novel itself. Yeah.
Effectively an advertisement. It's, know, we talk about those things as being, they're promises that the author is making of what's to come.
Absolutely. And it's the same kind of thing as, I mean, if I'm a fan of something, I love getting as much content as I can.
Yeah.
And a lot of books coming out have sample chapters released for publicity. I thought, and my publisher kind of agrees, that like the better thing to do is actually like give you an extra story, give you a bonus story.
Yeah, a little bit on the side.
A little bit of a prequel that'll like set it up and let you. And there's also like the other thing is like the other option is that The Broken Record, the first installment, is actually being published in installments by Phantasmagoria, an online magazine that I used to write for. And so Broken Record's online as well. So it's like there is prequel content out there to sort of introduce you
someone
to the
wants
world
to
and
seek it
everything.
out,
If you want, it's there, you know?
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's so that's been a really, really exciting process as well. And like Californian Catastrophe was just a fucking ball to write from start to finish.
Yeah, I mean, it reads. There's something about the life in it that reads like you really enjoyed writing it.
No, I did. Yeah,
you can tell. Like there's, and you know, we talk about this a lot when you talk about prose, but when something has life in it, it just like you can tell that whoever was writing it was in it at the moment.
Yeah,
and there's stuff we can tell, like, oh, you know, maybe it's like the 4th or 5th in a series and it's lagging a bit, but there's just this punch to it. It's quite unusual. So yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I kind of wanted to the particular opening that I enjoy, which is where he muses about Sunset Boulevard and where that name comes from. That was one of those moments where I was like, I'd never even thought about it. Like that's quite like, where did that thought come from? Was that just at the moment?
It was honestly as simple as like, Boone Shepard's one of those characters where he's this adventuring, crusading, investigative journalist. He travels around, he solves crimes and mysteries and rights wrongs and travels around his motorbike and gets into scrapes. But he's one of those characters who's like, he's a little bit eccentric and he's a little bit acerbic and he's a little bit like, he just gets caught up on weird things.
Yeah.
And just like a little bit like, he often just doesn't really want to be where he is. And
yeah.
It just kind of, I was like, how do I start this story? Like, how do I open it? And I just thought it would kind of be funny if like, because what Boone Shepard would do is, he'd ride into Los Angeles on what he thinks is this, of course it turns out in the story that it's not. He thinks he's on like this epic important quest, and it turns out it's actually not. He's just there on false information and his own arrogance.
Yeah.
But he's riding into it. I was like, what's he gonna be thinking about? It's like, well, he's never been to America. And there's a reason for that. Like, he's never seen this part of the world before.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought, for a character like Boone Shepard, who is from a very different world, coming into the crazy world of Los Angeles, he's just going to question things that we take for granted.
Yeah, that we've assumed
like
because
things
we've
like
seen
Sunset
it so
Boulevard
much.
that are famous streets that we know about and we've grown up thinking, oh yeah, Sunset Boulevard, it's an iconic famous street. Boone Shepard's going to ride in and be like, this is a famous street. Why the hell is it called Sunset Boulevard? Like,
Yeah, and it's
why?
like-
Like,
it's-
it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense.
It's this weird moment where you go, shit, he's kind of got a point.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's quite fascinating in that way. I think that is your humor bleeding through in a lot of ways. 'cause,
Yeah, no, thanks,
you know,
man.
it's that quite, not, you know, disrespectful or anything, but it's kind of that, like, slightly offbeat. You're like, well, what the fuck is this thing that we all know so well? Like, why is that
yeah.
a thing? And I think that's where Boone finds his identity, because he's kind of this weird Indiana Jones, Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
And he seems like he's quite fun to write.
Oh,
And-
he's a ball. He's just because he's just one of those characters who just he comes so easily to me, and I think like because I wrote the very first version of Boone Shepard when I was actually in year 11. And it was just a story that I wrote that it was based on a dream, actually, of all things. Like this dream where I was a journalist traveling around solving mysteries. And I woke up and I was like, fuck, that's a great idea for a
that's a fun-
story.
yeah.
And so I wrote it. And I wrote a few of them, but like I mentioned before, the teenage angst story that like I had friends who really liked. I was like to friends, hey, read Boone Shepard. And they were like, no, we don't like it. And I was like, all right. So I kind of forgot about it. And eventually kind of picked it up again a few years ago and like rewrote the whole thing again from the start. But it was just a story that never went away. But I think because I've sort of lived with the character in my head for so long, he sort of just becomes quite easy to write.
Yeah, I know what you
And-
mean. Yeah, he sort of finds characters like that.
Yeah.
What you get to know them,
And that's it. And like I know Boone back to front, and he's a really like he's just one of those characters where he is an adventurer and he's a hero. Like he's totally a hero. Like, you know, he saves the day all the time and everything, but he's got so many flaws. Like he never plans ahead. He's impulsive.
Yeah.
He's just like, I'm going to do this. It's like, well, what's the plan? He's like, there isn't a plan. I'm just going to do this.
Yeah, and see what
and then he
happens.
inevitably screws it up every
Exactly.
single time. And he's a little bit bumbling, but not bumbling in that kind of like, oh, I'm so goofy sort of way. Just bumbling in that like he just screws things up, and
Yeah.
that just makes him grumpier and more determined
Yeah.
and snarkier.
and suddenly you
more
find
just-
yourself being like, well, I'm kind of on his side because that
Yeah.
was a fuck up that he couldn't see coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite funny
And
how
he
we
kicks
sort
himself
of,
for it all the time. He's just kind of like, you know, he's like, yeah, he's not stupid. He just doesn't really think ahead.
yeah, because he has,
And
he has these moments of, particularly in the prequel, you know, he's able to infiltrate this building quite intelligently. But once he gets in there, he's like, yeah, I didn't really think about what I was going to do when I got here.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like,
exactly.
shit, now I'm in this library. Like, it's quite, something about that sort of, it has its roots in realism, but it's this weird, like, fun romp.
Well,
you
that's
know?
it. And I mean, like, so often, like, and I know this happens to me, like, obviously not in Boone Shepard's case of using a harpoon from the Hollywood sign to break into a director's house to steal a book.
You haven't done that personally?
Funnily enough, no. But,
Not in your free time.
But I think we all have situations where it's like, you know, we overthink situations and we overplan situations, and we are certain that we have this like really elaborate take on something, but we'll miss something so obvious.
Super obvious,
Like we'll
yeah.
miss something blatantly obvious, even though like the best laid plans, we
Mm-hmm.
make them, and then we'll just miss something that should have been staring us in the face from day one.
Because we've been looking
Or we've totally
beyond it.
misinterpreted the situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's very much like a standard Boone Shepard. Like somebody who read the book recently said that she really liked it because Boone Shepard was not a straight-laced hero. I mean, he is. He means well and he tries to do the right thing.
Yep.
But he's also very human and very flawed, and he screws up all the time.
Yeah, he's got this thoughtless streak in him.
Exactly. Yeah, he is reckless, and then he's got his character who's like initially his nemesis, then becomes his offsider, and then eventually his best friend, Promethea Peters, who's this snarky photographer who early on in the series always turns up at the worst possible times and tries to, because she's this photographer who believes that Boone Shepard's a fraud because he always gets the best stories, and so she's always trying to trip him up or steal his stories or something.
Yeah, and we see that in
And-
the prequel where she
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
busts
where she
into the library and
turns
she's
up.
like, what's your story? And he's like, I don't have
It's like-
time for this shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I'll team up with you. And then he betrays her. And like, yeah, in the Broken Record, there was this whole thing where she saves his life from a perilous situation.
Yep.
And then she's like, oh, what's the story? And he doesn't know. That's when they first meet. And he's like, oh, I'll let you in on the story. And then, of course, she turns around and backstabs him. And then it turns out that he's actually secretly backstabbed her already.
There you
and so
go.
he sent her to the wrong thing. And so their relationship's really fun because Prometheus is another character who ultimately means well, but is selfish and is loudmouthed and is arrogant and is snarky. And the fun of the series is showing Boone and Promethea both grow together, where they both become more selfless, they both become more heroic, and they learn to appreciate each other. They go from being like, we fucking hate each other, your shit, no, your shit, except they don't swear because it's a kid's novel.
Yeah.
But ultimately it sort of becomes about their friendship and relationship sort of developing in in what was a really, like, interestingly enough, a really natural way, because I didn't sort of, basically without sort of spoiling things, I didn't plan on their relationship going the way it did, but there were just moments in the writing. I was like, oh, hang on, this is what's happening.
Well, you go, this is what we expect to happen. But what would someone really do? You know, where's that turning point?
But I don't even think it was that thought out. Like, there was just moments where I'd be writing a scene expecting it to go one way, or like planning for it to go one way, and then suddenly I just had this overpowering feeling of being like, oh wait, no, hang on, that's not how it goes. And then you follow that down the rabbit hole, and it takes you to new and really unexpected places.
And I think that's absolutely how these, that's how these creations really find their legs. So when you first, you're saying that when you first started, you sort of had this dream about this character. So that's sort of where it really started, was with that. A lot of series and a lot of creative pieces start with the idea of a character. So, in Harry Potter's case, J.K. had this idea of this boy with this thunderbolt scar who this power was thrust upon him.
Yeah.
Was there a moment where you were like, okay, this is what Boone Shepard looks like, this is what he does for a living, and it just kind of happened from there?
Sort of, no, yes and no. I think he didn't, because J.K. Rowling, I think, said that Harry, like, walked into a head fully formed. I don't think Boone did that so much. I think initially Boone was like, he was a character who, because I'd been writing these teen angst stories at the time, and I wanted a character who was totally different to that. And in the dream, basically, the specific dream was, have you guys ever heard of the Paul is dead Beatles conspiracy? It's a conspiracy that Paul McCartney...
Producer's nodding, yep.
Yeah, it's great. It's actually one of those amazing things. You can spend an afternoon on Wikipedia. Yeah. The idea is that they replaced Paul McCartney with a double because he died in a car accident in 1966. And the Paul McCartney who has lived ever since then is not actually Paul McCartney.
Oh, okay.
And there are huge conspiracy theory websites dedicated to this, full of and that's the idea, because the dream was that I was a journalist investigating the Paul is dead conspiracy on a motorbike traveling around the country.
Yeah.
And that's the plot of The Broken Record, the first one.
Oh,
is that it's not actually Paul is dead, it's a band called The Bugs, I say in inverted commas, and it's, Boone Shepard investigating this, mysterious band that is obviously meant to be the Beatles, and that's kind of where it came from. But initially I was like, okay, this story, and at the time I was really into, it was a weird mixed match of influences. I was really into Jack Kerouac on the road. I was really into Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yep.
I was really into Oscar Wilde, like Dorian Gray, Importance of Being Earnest, stuff like that. And I was also working at a local newspaper. So I thought, okay, I really would love the main character to be a journalist, because I was doing a lot of that at the time. And I thought, okay, he's a journalist. And I was like, okay, but I don't want him to be a dark, angsty character. I want him to be a character who actually, is a bit quirky and doesn't take himself too seriously and is a little bit of fun. And I wanted the world to be a bit quirky. So the world that Boone Shepard takes place in, it's our world, but not. It's a bit heightened. It's got a little bit ridiculous.
The dial's on 11,
Exactly. Everything is just a bit off.
Peters drives a gyrocopter.
Yeah, Prometheus Peters drives a gyrocopter.
And he rides his motorbike on a rope.
Yeah. And Boone Shepard's motorbike is full of gadgets that and that's just normal. That's just, and there's other things that journalists and photographers are at war. There's a running joke, which I actually have a really, really elaborate explanation for.
Oh, okay.
And you'll see this when, in the book, manatees keep turning up. There's always, all the artwork in houses are just manatees. Okay. Or, in, expensive people's houses, there are just busts of manatees.
Yeah.
Or, just manatees keep turning... And there's a reason... There's actually a really elaborate reason for it. At first, it was a running joke. But basically, I just want the world to be a little bit absurd. I want it to just be fun. And, just a bit of a change of pace where you can just read it. The novel's one of those things you can read in 2 days, knock over. It's fast-paced. There's no filler. It just burns through plot. And I want it to be funny and engaging and quirky. And just one of those things that's just a fun kind of fast,
and you remember it as being like, oh, well, that was a really fun experience that I would love to go back to.
As it goes on, it gets a bit deeper, and that's kind of, I guess, who Boone had to be. And then, originally, I think I saw him as being kind of in his 30s, and then he got a bit younger, and so I wanted someone who had a little bit of that Oscar Wilde wit, but a little bit of that Hunter S. Thompson, Jack Kerouac kind of, because he's a nomad. He travels around and he just sleeps under the stars or in a tent because he's got a tent in the back of his motorbike in one of its many compartments, or like he just stays in different places and like poses as different people in different adventures. Like the Broken Record starts with him posing as a librarian in a small country town, and all this stuff, like depending on what his adventures are. And because I just love that whole like Kerouac idea of just like getting out there and wandering around and seeing the
just
world,
seeing what
not
happens,
any particular aim, just seeing what happens.
Yeah.
And so I guess it was a mixed match of like a bunch of really weird influences kind of all gelling together.
You put all the things that you like in a box and you shake it up and see what happens.
That's how I've always felt about Boone Shepard. Like the fun of these stories is that like, unlike other things I write that have a really particular thing, Boone Shepard's one of those things where you can throw anything at the wall and it will stick. Because the world is so ridiculous. So like in the third book, for example, they meet Alfred Hitchcock.
Oh,
and
awesome.
They get involved in a murder conspiracy with Alfred, and then Boone and Prometheus have to team up with Alfred Hitchcock to solve a crime. The first book, Oscar Wilde's in it, Bram Stoker's in it, like all these characters like turn up in various roles because the time travel element that comes into it.
Okay.
The second book, Boone has like an adventure with Janis Joplin.
Oh, wow, okay.
There's all kinds of stuff like that, just because it's set in the 60s and you can kind of do what you want. And
you've got breathing room there.
And I like to kind of like the first book, I kind of want to be like, I kind of like tried to model all the books after something I really enjoyed. So the first book is meant to be like a sort of gothic 1800s sort of adventure horror novel. The second book's meant to be like a western, like a rollicking American western. If it was a movie, the whole soundtrack would be Creedence Clearwater Revival. It's just like, traveling across the country, like, fighting cowboys and just having a great time. And it ends on a flying casino over Las Vegas. It's a ball.
Amazing.
And then like the third book is meant to be like an Alfred Hitchcock murder mystery. So all the characters are named after characters from Hitchcock movies or from Hannibal Lecter. So like I think one of the characters is like Freddie Crawford or something like that.
That's
so
amazing.
all the characters' names are mashups. So it's just like I really enjoy like just filling it with Easter eggs of just things I like. So again, like what you said, like just throw everything I like in a box, shake it up, and hope for the best.
Yeah, and I mean
been the process. Yeah.
I think particularly as a reader, you can sense when that works and when it doesn't. And I think having just read the prequels instead of touched on some of the other content, I think one of the things that's really interesting about the style that you employ is that, as you said before, it's mostly plot. You don't linger on the exposition. You let it kind of speak for itself. There's the moment where Pete, they're on the roof at the end, and he ramps his bike off the roof and onto the hill or whatever, and then she gets in her gyrocopter. That was one of those moments where I was like, oh well, that makes sense because that's the world that they're in. There's no point where you're like, well, she got in a gyrocopter, and the reason she has a gyrocopter is blah, 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 blah.
She's got a gyrocopter.
She just has one.
Because of course she does.
Yeah, because why wouldn't she?
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's a secret passage in the library.
Yeah.
Because why wouldn't there be?
Exactly. And that's kind of like my whole logic with the whole thing. It's just like, well, fuck it, why not? Like, just, why not? And it's, and yeah, that's like, I've always found like, particularly like when I'm writing comedies, and it's sort of the same principle when I'm writing Boone Shepard, if something makes me laugh, or makes me kind of be like, that's audacious and ridiculous and silly, and I can't believe I'm doing it, but fuck it, I'm going to do it. Because like so much of what I write tends to be like darker, sort of more crime thriller stuff.
Yeah.
And so getting to play in a playground as ludicrous as this has been a total change of pace. And it's great. Like I love it. It's so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed reading the prequels, and I'm sure when the book comes out that we'll have to revisit the conversation so we can talk about it in some more depth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when is Boone Shepard coming out? What's the release date?
April. So at the moment, some advanced copies have kind of gone out to reviewers and distributors and stuff like that. But it comes out officially in April. I believe the idea at this point, and I don't want to speak too soon, but I mean, because obviously so much depends on like if it does well, things like that. It should be at this point. Look, I'm not too sure because a lot of this stuff is kind of above my pay grade. But at this point, it's it should be like in all your major bookstores, your Dimmicks, your Reading, stuff like that. And yeah, basically come out in April. The idea is that the second book will come out in September or November, and then the third and the fourth the year after that.
Okay.
But I mean, again, like, and I've got like other ideas for further stories. I've got like a whole mapped out sequel story about his daughter set 20 years later.
Awesome.
I've got the whole world like mapped out.
You got it ready to go.
So I mean, basically, if it fails, it's going to be shit because a lot of that work will be for nothing. But like, fuck it anyway. It was fun to write. So
yeah, well, I mean, that's what matters at the end of the day.
No skin off my nose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So is there anything else that you want to spruik while you're here? Anything else you're involved in currently that's worth mentioning?
At the moment, well, I've got a new play coming up.
Of course, Lucas Conundrum. Yeah.
Which was another really fun thing. Lucas Conundrum opens in February at Club Voltaire in Melbourne on February the 16th, I think.
That'll be a few days before this comes out, so that's probably
wicked.
perfect.
I was going to ask, when this lines up.
Probably perfect.
Lucas Conundrum's like, it's about, basically, it's funny, you know that thing that happened last year where a 6 Star Wars fan asked to see the film early, and J.J. Abrams let him. I actually wrote it before that happened, but it's a very similar concept.
Okay.
It's about a director in Hollywood who, in the 80s, had a massive fantasy franchise to his name that was like the most popular thing, and like, you know, kids and people all over the world love it, and it's a huge thing. But ever since then, none of his films have really had the same impact. He's just kind of had a string of flops.
Yep.
And so now in 2016, he's returning to that franchise to make a new installment. And it's a huge thing. Anticipation all over the world is like sky high. And then it turns out there's this kid who's a fan of the films who is dying of cancer.
Yep.
And the kid has like started an internet petition to let him see the film early. And the director refuses to let him see the film. The director's like, no, he's not seeing the film. He's not seeing the film until I'm ready.
Yep.
And so basically the film is the play is kind of about the producers and like the director's like girlfriend and stuff kind of coming in and trying to influence him. And it all kind of becomes a little bit like it. Yeah, the Lucas conundrum, the title, the poster I think sums it up. It's a figure of a man looking at posters for Indiana Jones 4, posters for Mad Max Fury Road, posters for Terminator Genesis, for Prometheus, for Star Wars Episode 1, basically for belated sequels to popular originals.
Yeah. And
so the Lucas conundrum of the title is referring specifically to directors, well, to belated sequels in general, but more specifically to directors coming back to their old properties,
revisiting,
and how often that fails.
Yep.
So you've got Fury Road, which was obviously a rip-roaring success in terms of box office and critical acclaim, but then on the other hand, you've got Prometheus, or you've got the Star Wars prequels, or you've got Indiana Jones 4.
You're less successful
and
ones.
Exactly, and then the ones that aren't the original director but still didn't do that well, like Terminator Genesis or Tron Legacy or whatever.
Yep.
And so basically it's this director who's, like, the real core of his conflict is that he's grappling with the fact that, you know, he's terrified that he can't actually make a good film. And his real conflict is that he doesn't want the kid to see the film because he's scared the film is shit. And he doesn't want the kid to die hating something that means the world to him.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so it kind of plays out those themes. And basically it was just a fun way to kind of explore the state of Hollywood and the state of, you know, how he just makes sequel after sequel after sequel at the moment. And all of, it's kind of just a look at what Hollywood is now and what the state of the film industry is now. It's the kind of play that, like, will never get performed again because in 5 years' time it'll be so dated. But for right now, at this moment, I think it should be a bit of fun. And it's funny, and people yell at each other, and there's a lot of swearing and a lot of politically incorrect humor.
Perfect.
And I think it should be all right.
Well, all that stuff will be linked in the show notes as always. But of course, you said it at the start, you're on Movie Maintenance, so the Sanspants Radio guys.
Yeah.
And that's on iTunes and YouTube. And then obviously got Boone Shepard coming out in June. April, sorry. April. So, anyone listening, keep an eye out for that. Thanks for coming in and speaking to us.
Hey,
it's
man,
been a treasure. Yeah, absolutely. And anything else, any closing thoughts you've got on the way out?
No, man.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thanks again for coming, and I'm sure we'll catch you, hopefully, when your book's out and you're a multi-cajillion-dollar success.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Cheers, man.
The track's amazing. Yeah. The visuals are very, like, well done. And, like, the gameplay is super fun. And, like, because those three things are there, it's like, it's exceptionally good.
I could do it in a heartbeat and make millions, but it would feel like just gouging my soul out.
Yeah, Jurassic Park's a little more like DDR.
If Shrek is a fairy tale creature, can he actually own land and want to kick them off? Where did that come from? You have to make a lot of shit up to make good art.
Yeah.
That's just the truth, buddy. Links to our other shows, YouTube channel, and merchandise can be found in the show notes as well. Thanks for listening.